Dr. Elena Vasquez knelt beside the twisted wreckage of what had once been humanity's most advanced exploration vessel. The Meridian had crash-landed on Kepler 442b 3 months ago, and she was the only survivor among the crew of 47. The alien world stretched endlessly around her, its twin suns casting purple shadows across crystalline formations that jutted from the ground like frozen lightning. She pressed her palm against the cold metal surface of her discovery. The object was roughly cylindrical, about the size of a human torso, with intricate geometric patterns etched into its obsidian surface. Strange symbols pulsed with a faint blue light along its edges. Elena had found it buried beneath the ship's twisted hull, perfectly preserved despite the catastrophic impact. "Day 93, she whispered into her damaged comm recorder. "I've managed to extract the artifact from the crash site. It appears to be of non-human origin, possibly predating any known galactic civilizations by millennia." The artifact hummed softly, responding to her touch with warmth that seemed almost alive. Elena had spent weeks studying its surface, mapping every symbol, every curve of its alien design. Her xenoarchaeology training told her this was significant, but her isolation on this hostile world made proper analysis nearly impossible. Behind her, something howled in the distance. The indigenous predators of Kepler 442b had been growing bolder lately, venturing closer to her makeshift shelter each night. Her emergency beacon had been transmitting for months with no response. The nearest human colony was 17 light-years away, and subspace communication remained impossible due to the planetary interference. Elena carefully wrapped the artifact in salvaged thermal blankets and carried it back toward her shelter, a reinforced section of the ship's medical bay that had somehow remained intact. As she walked, she noticed the way local wildlife seemed to avoid the artifact's presence. Small insect-like creatures that usually swarmed around her gave the bundle a wide berth. That evening, as the twin suns set and the planet's 3 moons rose, Elena placed the artifact on her makeshift workbench. She had rigged a power source from the ship's emergency cells, giving her enough energy to run basic scanning equipment. The readings were unlike anything in the databases. "The molecular structure defies classification," she muttered, adjusting the scanner's frequency. "It's not quite organic, not quite mechanical. It's like it exists in a state between matter and energy." As if responding to her words, the artifact's blue glow intensified slightly. Elena stepped back, hand moving instinctively to the plasma cutter at her belt. But the object remained motionless, its gentle humming actually soothing in the alien night. She had tried everything to activate it properly. Voice commands, touch patterns, even playing music from her personal collection. Nothing had produced more than the subtle responses she'd already observed. The frustration was eating at her almost as much as the isolation. Outside her shelter, something large crashed through the crystalline undergrowth. Elena grabbed her rifle and checked the perimeter monitors. The screens showed multiple heat signatures moving in coordinated patterns. Pack hunters. She'd seen their kind before, massive reptilian creatures with 6 legs and mandibles that could crush duraplast armor. The howling grew closer, and Elena realized with growing dread that tonight might be different. The pack was larger than usual, at least 12 individuals. Her shelter's defenses were designed for emergency situations, not prolonged siege. She glanced at the artifact, still glowing peacefully on her workbench. For weeks, she'd been convinced it was some kind of guardian technology, possibly left behind by an ancient civilization to protect something valuable. But guardian of what? And why hadn't it activated when she needed protection most? The first creature appeared at the edge of her light perimeter, its 6 eyes reflecting the shelter's external illumination like burning coals. It was massive, easily 3 meters at the shoulder, with scales that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Others began emerging from the darkness, surrounding her position with predatory patience. Elena checked her rifle's power cell. enough for maybe 20 shots at full power. Not nearly enough for a pack this size. She thought about the emergency self-destruct charges she'd salvaged from the ship, but using them would mean destroying everything, including the artifact that might be humanity's greatest archaeological discovery. The lead predator stepped closer, testing her defenses. Elena fired a warning shot, the plasma bolt illuminating the night in brilliant blue. The creature barely flinched, and its packmates began closing the circle. That's when she heard it, a sound she'd never heard before. The artifact was no longer just humming. It was singing, a complex melody that seemed to resonate through the ground itself. Elena turned to see the object rising slowly from her workbench, supported by no visible force. The geometric patterns on its surface were now blazing with blue-white light. The predators froze, their aggressive postures shifting to something that looked almost like reverence. The lead creature actually backed away, lowering its massive head as if bowing. Elena watched in amazement as the artifact continued its ascent, stopping when it reached eye level with her. For the first time since the crash, Elena felt something she'd almost forgotten: hope. But as the artifact's song grew more complex and its light brighter, she realized that whatever was happening was only the beginning. The ancient technology had finally recognized her need, but she had no idea what price that recognition might demand. The pack of predators retreated into the darkness, their howls now carrying a different tone entirely: fear. Elena reached out cautiously toward the floating artifact, her hand trembling slightly. When her fingers made contact with its warm surface, images flooded her mind. Vast star maps, ancient battles, and something else. Something that made her understand that this world, this specific planet, was not a random crash site. It was exactly where she was supposed to be. The visions came in waves, each one more vivid than the last. Elena saw herself as others had seen her throughout her life, but from perspectives that shouldn't have been possible. Her childhood on Mars Colony 7, her years studying xenoarchaeology at Luna University, even moments from the Meridian's final mission. But these weren't memories. They were assessments, evaluations conducted by something that had been watching humanity for far longer than anyone realized. Elena staggered backward as the artifact's light dimmed to its previous gentle glow, settling back onto her workbench as if nothing had happened. But everything had changed. She could feel it in the air around her, in the way the very atoms seemed to vibrate with new purpose. "You've been testing us," she whispered, understanding flooding through her consciousness. "Testing all of us." The artifact pulsed once. A gesture she somehow interpreted as confirmation. Elena's hands shook as she activated her recording equipment, though she doubted anyone would believe what she was about to document. Supplemental log, day 93, hour 2300. The artifact has exhibited clear signs of artificial intelligence, possibly of a sophistication beyond current human understanding. It appears to have been conducting surveillance of human activities across multiple star systems for an unknown duration. But even as she spoke, Elena knew the truth was far more complex. The surveillance wasn't malicious. It was protective. The artifact, and whatever civilization had created it, had been watching humanity's expansion into space with the careful attention of parents observing a child's first steps. Over the following days, the artifact became more responsive to Elena's presence. It would float gently around her shelter, its patterns shifting in what she began to recognize as a form of communication. When she worked on repairing her communication equipment, it would position itself to provide optimal lighting. When she prepared meals from her dwindling rations, it would emit a warmth that helped with the cooking process. The predators never returned. Elena began to understand that her crash on Kepler 442b hadn't been an accident. The Meridian's navigation systems had been subtly influenced, guided to this specific world by forces beyond their detection. The artifact had been waiting, hidden beneath layers of sediment and time, for the right human to find it. "But why me?" she asked it during one of their strange conversations. Elena had taken to speaking aloud to the artifact, and while it couldn't respond with words, its light patterns had become increasingly sophisticated. The artifact projected a hologram, the first time it had displayed such capability. Elena saw herself as a child, fascinated by alien ruins discovered on Titan. She watched her younger self studying ancient symbols with intense concentration, the same symbols she now recognized on the artifact's surface. "You've been watching since then," she realized. "Watching and waiting for me to develop the skills you needed." The hologram shifted, showing her years of academic work, her breakthrough theories about ancient galactic civilizations, her insistence that humanity wasn't alone in the universe, despite the lack of contact with living alien species. Every step of her career had been building toward this moment. Then the artifact showed her something that made her blood run cold. Ships, massive vessels of unfamiliar design moving through space toward human colonies. Their hulls were dark, angular, built for war rather than exploration. Elena counted dozens of them, then hundreds. "The Devourers," she whispered, the name coming to her from nowhere and everywhere at once. Images flashed through her mind. Worlds stripped bare, civilizations consumed, entire star systems left as empty husks. The artifact had been placed here as an early warning system, a guardian against something that had destroyed countless species across the galaxy. The hostile fleet was still months away from the nearest human world, but their intent was clear. Humanity had finally grown large enough, advanced enough, to attract their attention. The test period was over. Elena spent the next week learning to communicate more effectively with the artifact. It taught her its symbol system, downloaded star maps directly into her consciousness, and most importantly, began training her to use technologies that human science was still centuries from developing. The artifact wasn't just a guardian, it was a key, one that could unlock the collective knowledge and defenses left behind by dozens of extinct civilizations. All the species that had faced the Devourers and fallen, but not before contributing their discoveries to a vast network of protective systems scattered across the galaxy. Elena learned to interface directly with the artifact through touch, feeling information flow between them like electricity. She discovered that similar artifacts existed on other worlds, waiting for worthy guardians to activate them. But most had remained dormant for millennia, their potential guardians either never arriving or failing the tests that determined compatibility. "How many others are active?" she asked during one session. The artifact showed her a star map with 3 points of light. Including her own world, only 3 artifacts had found compatible guardians. Against a fleet of hundreds of Devourer ships, 3 defenders seemed pathetically inadequate. But as Elena delved deeper into the artifact's knowledge base, she began to understand the true scope of the ancient defense network. Each activated artifact could awaken dormant systems across entire sectors of space. Automated defense platforms, hidden weapons caches, even entire artificial moons designed as fortress worlds. The catch was coordination. The 3 active artifacts needed to work in perfect harmony to initiate the awakening sequence. And with subspace communication impossible due to the Devourer's advanced interference, that coordination would require something unprecedented in galactic history. A direct link between 3 minds separated by hundreds of light years. Elena felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders like a lead blanket. Everything humanity had accomplished, every colony they'd established, every life they'd built among the stars, now depended on her ability to master technology that had taken its creators millions of years to develop. The artifact pulsed with what she'd learned to recognize as urgency. The Devourer fleet had changed course, moving faster than predicted. They would reach the outer human colonies in 6 weeks, not 6 months. Elena began working with desperate intensity, learning to project her consciousness across space while maintaining connection with the artifact. The process was exhausting, requiring her to remain in constant physical contact with the device while extending her awareness to impossible distances. On her first attempt, she managed to sense the other two guardians. One was an elderly Zephyrian philosopher on a world near the galactic core. The other, a young human engineer working alone on a research station in the Vega system. Both had been chosen for the same reasons Elena had, their minds shaped by years of preparation they hadn't realized was happening. But sensing them and communicating with them were very different challenges. Elena's early attempts at contact resulted in nothing but painful feedback that left her unconscious for hours. The artifact would hover anxiously over her during these recovery periods, its light dim with what almost looked like concern. Time was running out, and Elena was still struggling with the most basic elements of the connection process. The Devourers continued their advance toward human space, and each day brought them closer to the point of no return. It was during her 7th attempt that Elena finally understood what she'd been doing wrong. She'd been trying to maintain her individual consciousness while linking with the others. But the connection required something far more profound. She had to trust completely, letting go of her sense of self and becoming part of something larger. When she finally made the breakthrough, the sensation was unlike anything she'd ever experienced. Suddenly, she wasn't just Elena Vasquez, alone on a hostile world. She was part of a trinity of minds, each bringing their unique perspective and abilities to bear on an impossible challenge. The connection stabilized just as the Devourer fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Centauri system. Elena felt her consciousness expand beyond anything she'd thought possible, simultaneously existing on Kepler 442b, the Zephyrian homeworld, and Vega station. Through her link with Corvash, the Zephyrian philosopher, she experienced centuries of meditation and mental discipline. Through David Chen, the human engineer, she accessed computational abilities that made human supercomputers seem like pocket calculators. Together, they initiated the awakening sequence. Across the galaxy, dormant systems that had slept for millions of years suddenly blazed to life. Ancient defense platforms hidden in asteroid fields powered up their weapons. Artificial intelligences that had been waiting in standby mode began analyzing current tactical situations. Most importantly, the vast network of early warning systems began feeding real-time intelligence about the Devourer fleet to every activated node in the network. Elena felt the scope of what they were commanding and nearly lost her connection from sheer awe. Hundreds of worlds, thousands of defensive installations, technologies that bent the laws of physics in ways human science couldn't even begin to comprehend. The civilizations that had built this network had been fighting the Devourers for millions of years before finally succumbing. But they'd left behind the tools for their successors to succeed where they had failed. But the Devourers had learned from those ancient battles as well. Their ships were equipped with countermeasures against many of the network's weapons, and their tactics had evolved to exploit weaknesses in the defensive systems. What should have been an overwhelming advantage for the defenders was rapidly becoming a more even fight. The first engagement occurred near Proxima Centauri, where a squadron of Devourer scouts encountered a reactivated defense platform. Elena experienced the battle through multiple perspectives simultaneously, feeling the platform's artificial intelligence calculating firing solutions while sensing the scouts' alien thought patterns through intercepted communications. The platform destroyed 3 scouts before the survivors managed to overwhelm its shields with coordinated plasma bombardments. But the engagement had provided crucial intelligence. The Devourers were using organic components in their ship's control systems, making them partially immune to certain types of electronic warfare. Elena shared this information instantly with the other Guardians, and together they began adapting the network's tactics. Ancient weapons that had lain dormant for eons were reprogrammed on the fly, their targeting parameters shifted to account for the Devourer's biological defenses. The main Devourer fleet reached Earth's outer defensive perimeter 72 hours after the first engagement. Elena watched through orbital sensors as hundreds of dark ships emerged from hyperspace, like a plague of mechanical locusts. Earth's conventional defenses engaged immediately, but their weapons barely scratched the aliens' hulls. That's when the ancient network truly showed its power. Hidden installations throughout the solar system revealed themselves, rising from positions on the far side of asteroids or emerging from underground complexes on airless moons. Weapons that used principles of physics unknown to human science began targeting the Devourer ships with devastating accuracy. But for every alien ship destroyed, 2 more seemed to take its place. Elena realized with growing horror that this wasn't the main Devourer force. This was a scouting fleet, designed to test the defenses and gather intelligence about the network's capabilities. Through her connection with Corvash, Elena accessed memories from the Zephyrian species' first encounter with the Devourers 3 centuries earlier. The aliens always fought this way, sending expendable forces to probe defenses before committing their true strength. The real invasion wouldn't begin until they'd mapped every weapon, every defensive position, every possible escape route. Elena felt David Chen's computational mind racing through probability matrices, calculating odds and outcomes at superhuman speed. The results were not encouraging. Even with the full ancient network activated, their chances against the main Devourer fleet were less than 30%. But David's analysis also revealed something the ancient civilizations had never possessed: adaptability. Every species that had faced the Devourers before had relied on static defenses and predetermined strategies. They'd built magnificent weapons and impregnable fortresses, but they'd never learned to truly innovate during battle. Humanity was different. Elena's own experience was proof of that. She'd survived alone on a hostile world by constantly adapting, finding new solutions to impossible problems. That same quality existed throughout human space, from the colonies that had thrived in conditions their designers never anticipated, to the explorers who kept pushing into unknown regions despite endless dangers. Elena began sharing this insight with the network's artificial intelligences, teaching them to modify their own programming in real time. Ancient weapon systems that had fired the same type of energy beams for millions of years suddenly began experimenting with new frequencies and modulation patterns. Defense platforms started reconfiguring themselves, adding components cannibalized from nearby installations to create entirely new types of weapons. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Devourer ships that had adapted to counter the network's standard attacks found themselves facing completely new threats. Their organic components, so effective against predictable electronic warfare, became liabilities when the attacks themselves kept evolving. But the true test came when the main Devourer fleet finally arrived. Elena felt her consciousness stretched to its absolute limit as she tried to coordinate defenses across 17 star systems simultaneously. Through the network, she could sense the vast alien fleet, ships the size of cities organized into formations that spoke of millions of years of military evolution. There were thousands of them, enough to sterilize every human world twice over. The battle that followed defied every conventional understanding of space combat. Ancient weapons awakened from dormant states fired across impossible distances, their beams bending space itself to strike targets in other star systems. Devourer ships responded with weapons that consumed matter at the subatomic level, leaving wounds in reality that took minutes to heal. Elena found herself fighting on levels she hadn't known existed. Her consciousness simultaneously directing orbital bombardments, coordinating evacuation efforts on threatened colonies, and engaging in direct mental combat with Devourer command nodes. The aliens' thoughts were cold and predatory, focused entirely on consumption and growth. but they possessed a terrible intelligence that made each encounter a battle for sanity as much as strategy. The turning point came when Elena realized that the Devourers' greatest strength was also their greatest weakness. Their hive-mind coordination made them incredibly efficient, but it also made them predictable. Working with David and Korvash, she began introducing random elements into the network's responses, creating patterns of chaos that the alien fleet couldn't adapt to quickly enough. Suddenly, the ancient weapons weren't just fighting with new tactics. They were fighting with human imagination. Elena watched Devourer ships falter as they encountered defensive systems that operated on principles of pure creativity, weapons that changed their fundamental nature based on artistic inspiration rather than tactical doctrine. The main alien fleet began to retreat, but Elena knew this was just the beginning. The Devourers would return, probably with new countermeasures against the chaos tactics. But something fundamental had changed in the galaxy's balance of power. For the first time in millions of years, the Devourers had faced an enemy that could out-evolve them. Elena felt her consciousness finally returning fully to her own body on Kepler 442b. The artifact floated peacefully beside her, its patterns now showing a deep, satisfied blue. Through the network, she maintained contact with David and Korvash, but the crisis-level connection was no longer necessary. Outside her shelter, she could see ships descending through the atmosphere. Human ships coming to investigate the energy signatures that had been detected during the battle. Elena smiled as she realized her long isolation was finally over. But more importantly, humanity now had a guardian network that spanned the galaxy, one that could adapt and grow stronger with each challenge. The Devourers would return, but when they did, they'd face something they'd never encountered before, an enemy that refused to fight by the old rules. Elena reached out to touch the artifact one last time, feeling its warm acknowledgement of everything they'd accomplished together. She'd claimed it would guard her, and everyone had ignored her warnings about the coming threat. But when the battle came, it had charged into the fight with weapons that could reshape reality itself, and it had brought friends.